The smell of stargazer lilies is something I'll never be able to separate from that day. Too sweet, too heavy. The kind of scent that clings to your clothes and follows you home. I noticed it the second I stepped through the double doors of Hargrove and Sons funeral home, carrying a tray of canapes that nobody was going to eat. I wasn't supposed to be there. My coworker Britt had called in sick 30 minutes before the shift started, and my manager at Gilded Fork Catering had basically begged me over the phone. It's a private event, high-end client, double pay. That was all she said. I'd been behind on our rent since February, so I put on my black uniform, pulled my hair back, and drove to an address in the North Shore neighborhood I'd never been to before. Nobody told me it was a funeral until I was already inside. The room was enormous, all dark mahogany and white lilies arranged in cascading towers along every wall. Men in suits that cost more than my car sat in clusters, speaking in voices so low they barely registered as sound. There were no women except for a few older ones in black veils sitting near the front. No one looked at me. That's the thing about working catering. You become invisible the second you pick up a tray. People talk around you like you're furniture. I moved through the room carefully, offering food that nobody touched. The casket was at the far end, open, raised on a platform. White satin interior, brass handles. I kept my eyes away from it as long as I could. I've never done well with funerals. I'd only been to 2 in my life, and both times I'd felt an irrational need to run. I don't know what made me look. Maybe it was the way the room had gone so still, even for a room full of people trying to be quiet. Maybe it was instinct. I'd been working as a home health aide for 3 years before I switched to catering, and something about that stillness pulled at the part of me that was trained to notice when something was wrong. I looked at the man in the casket. He had a strong jaw, dark hair swept back from his face, tattoos visible above his collar. The kind that didn't look like impulse decisions. He was probably in his mid-40s, handsome in a way that felt almost unfair, even lying there. I don't know why I kept looking. I don't know why I stepped closer, and then I saw it. The faintest movement. So small that if I hadn't spent years watching patients in beds, checking for breath, checking for the rise and fall of a chest that was supposed to be still, I would have missed it completely. His chest moved. I stood there for 3 full seconds, telling myself I was imagining it. People see things at funerals. The grief does something to your vision. I knew that, but I also knew what I'd seen. I set my tray down on the nearest surface without looking at it and walked toward the casket. The man closest to me, large, dark-suited, the kind of person who stands slightly apart from others because he's being paid to, noticed immediately. He stepped forward. "Miss, you can't. I'm a health aide," I said quietly. "Call 911. Right now." He didn't move. I leaned over the casket and pressed 2 fingers to the man's neck, just below his jaw, and there it was. A pulse. Faint, slower than it should have been, but there. "He's alive," I said. My voice didn't shake. I don't know how. This man is alive. "Call 911 right now, or I will." The room didn't explode the way you might expect. There was no screaming. It went the opposite directions, a silence so complete and sudden that I could hear the candles flickering in their holders along the walls, and then the man in the casket opened his eyes. They were gray. Not blue-gray or green-gray. Just gray, clear and sharp, looking directly up at me like he'd been awake the whole time and was only now deciding to acknowledge it. "Don't," he said. His voice was low and rough and came out like it cost him something. "Don't call anyone." I stared at him. "You're alive." His jaw tightened, inconveniently. The large man in the suit, I'd find out later, his name was Corso, the head of security, was beside me in 3 steps. He wasn't touching me, but he was close enough that I understood I wasn't going anywhere. "Help me up," the man in the casket said. "Sir, you shouldn't." "Help me up, Corso." I stepped back. Corso and another man I hadn't noticed before reached in and lifted him carefully, 1 arm each, and got him sitting upright. The color was coming back to his face, but slowly. His hands were shaking in a way I recognized. The particular tremor of someone whose blood pressure had bottomed out and was trying to climb back up. "You need a hospital," I said. I don't know why I kept talking. Every rational instinct I had was telling me to pick up my tray and walk out the front door and go home and never think about this again. What I need, he said, looking at me again with those gray eyes, is to know who you are. I'm the caterer. Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile, not quite, but close. The caterer. I used to work in home health. I recognized the breathing pattern. I paused. Someone poisoned you, didn't they? It wasn't a question. I'd seen enough in 3 years of home care to know what someone looked like coming out of a medically induced near-death. The skin tone, the muscle response, the specific quality of that shallow breathing. This wasn't a heart attack. This was something administered. The room had gone so quiet that I could hear the traffic outside, 4 stories below. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sloan," I said, and then immediately thought, why did I tell him that? Sloan. He repeated it like he was filing it somewhere permanent. "I'm going to need you to come with us. I'm working. Your shift," Corso said behind me, in a tone that made it clear this was not a request, "is over." His name was Rafferty Cross. I didn't learn that right away. In the car, a black SUV with tinted windows that I got into because there were 4 very large men positioned between me and every exit. Nobody told me anything for almost 20 minutes. Rafferty sat across from me, jacket removed, while a man they called the doctor checked his vitals with the kind of portable equipment that didn't come from a drugstore. I watched the doctor work. He was thorough, methodical, and he didn't look at me once. "His blood pressure is stabilizing," I said finally, mostly to myself. The doctor glanced up. "You can read that from here? His color is better, and he stopped shaking about 5 minutes ago. And he's breathing without effort now." I looked at Rafferty. "Whoever gave you whatever they gave you, they either got the dosage wrong, or they miscalculated how long the service would run. You were supposed to be in the ground before you woke up." Rafferty looked at me for a long moment. Most people would be screaming right now. I spent 3 years keeping people calm in medical crises. Screaming doesn't help. "No," he said, "it doesn't." The car stopped. I didn't recognize the building. Somewhere in River North, all glass and steel, and a private underground garage that required 2 key codes to enter. I was walked, not unkindly, through a service entrance and up to a floor that I later found out occupied the entire top level of the building. It looked nothing like what I expected. No velvet, no dark wood. Clean lines. Art on the walls that was clearly the real thing, not prints. A kitchen that was larger than my entire apartment. Someone handed me a glass of water without being asked, and I drank half of it before I thought to wonder if I should have. "It's water," Corso said, watching me. "Just water. Thank you for clarifying," I said. "Given the circumstances, you'll understand why I'm checking." Rafferty almost smiled again at that. He was seated now at a long table, still pale but better, a fresh shirt on. Someone had produced it from somewhere in under 4 minutes. That told me something about how often this kind of contingency was planned for. "You said someone poisoned me," he said. "You were specific." "Why? The progression I saw doesn't match cardiac events or stroke. It matches alkaloid suppression. The kind that slows the central nervous system down gradually instead of all at once. It's careful. Intentional." I set my glass down. "It's also not foolproof, which is why you're still here." He looked at me for a long time. Long enough that I had to work to not look away. "Who do you work for?" he asked. "Gilded Fork Catering. Before that, Sunrise Home Health Services on the north side. Before that, Mercy Hospital, nursing assistant track until I couldn't afford to finish the degree." I held his gaze. "I'm not a threat to you. I'm a 28-year-old woman from Pilsen who needed the double pay shift. And yet you're the only person in a room full of my people who noticed I wasn't dead." That landed between us with more weight than I expected. I didn't have an answer for it. Neither did he, apparently, because he let the silence sit for a moment before he turned to Corso and said, "Find out who had access to the preparation room, and find out who knew about the service timeline." Corso nodded and left. "What happens to me now?" I asked. Rafferty looked back at me. "That depends on what you want. I want to go home. You can." He didn't hesitate, which surprised me. "Corso will drive you. Your pay for tonight will be covered, and then some, and you'll forget everything you saw." He paused. "Or," I waited, "you stay. Long enough for us to verify the threat is contained. You'll be compensated generously for your time and your inconvenience. And if I say no to both options and just call the police right now, You could do that. He seemed genuinely unbothered by the possibility. Though I'd point out that you've already been in this building for 40 minutes and in a vehicle registered to a shell company for 20 before that, and explaining any of that to the authorities would require explaining why you didn't call immediately in the funeral home. I'd walked into that one. You're very calm for someone who just woke up in a coffin. I've had worse mornings. I believed him, which probably said something about my judgment. I stayed. The next 72 hours were the strangest of my life, which is saying something, because I once showed up to a home care shift and found my patient had adopted a raccoon. I was given a room, a guest suite that was nicer than anywhere I'd ever slept, with a bathroom that had heated floors and a view of Lake Michigan that I stood in front of for a full minute the first morning, just trying to absorb it. Someone brought meals at regular intervals without being asked. Nobody locked my door. Nobody searched my phone. And nobody explained anything. I saw Rafferty at dinner the first night. He was quieter then, more tired, the adrenaline and medical incident catching up with him in a way he was visibly trying not to show. I noticed because I spent 3 years learning to notice those things. You should be resting, I said. I have things to resolve. They'll still be there tomorrow. He looked at me across the table like no one had said that to him in a very long time. You're very direct. You're the one who asked me to stay. I assumed that meant you wanted honest. The corner of his mouth moved. Most people who sit at this table agree with everything I say. That sounds exhausting. It is, he said. And there was something in his voice that wasn't entirely composed for once. Something that slipped through before he pulled it back. I didn't push. I'd learned, in home health, that the most useful thing you can sometimes do is let something sit without picking it up. He asked me about the job, the degree I hadn't finished, the shift that landed me in his funeral. I told him. I didn't perform it. Didn't make it more dramatic or more pathetic than it was. Student loans, a sick parent whose bills overlapped with my tuition, a choice I made that I didn't regret because it had kept her alive for another 2 years. The catering work paid decently and didn't require scrubs. He listened in a way that I wasn't used to. Not waiting for his turn, actually listening. You gave up the career you wanted to take care of her, he said. I'd make the same choice again. He was quiet for a moment. I believe you. I didn't know why that felt significant. It just did. On the 3rd day, Corso came to tell me they'd found the source. I was in the kitchen. I'd started making coffee in the mornings because I couldn't find anything to do, and motion helps me think. When he appeared in the doorway, with the specific expression of someone delivering news they'd rather not. It was internal, he said, not to me, because Rafferty had walked in behind him. The funeral director was approached 3 weeks ago. Payment made through 4 different accounts. Rafferty didn't move for a moment. Who approached him? Barrington. A name that meant nothing to me. But the air in the room changed in a way that was unmistakable. The specific shift that happens when someone hears the answer to a question they already suspected but hoped they were wrong about. His own partner, I said quietly, before I thought about whether I should. Both of them looked at me. The way you're reacting, I said. It's not surprise. It's the specific expression of someone who just had a suspicion confirmed. Someone close to you. Rafferty looked at Corso. Corso looked at Rafferty. Something passed between them that I couldn't read. She's observant, Corso said finally. She's the reason I'm here, Rafferty replied. He looked at me. Barrington has been my business partner for 11 years. We built the majority of what I have together, and he tried to have you buried alive. Apparently. Okay. I picked up my coffee. What are you going to do about it? Something in his expression shifted. I'd asked the question that everyone around him had clearly been waiting to ask and hadn't. Deal with it, he said. The way I deal with things. That's a very vague answer. It's a vague situation. No, it isn't, I said. It's actually a very specific situation. Someone you trusted tried to kill you. That's not vague. That's one of the most specific things that can happen to a person. He stared at me for a moment, then something released in his face. Not collapse, not weakness. Just a fraction less of whatever performance he maintained at all times. And he almost laughed. You're not afraid of me, he said. Should I be? Most people are. I thought about it. You've been nothing but careful with me since the moment I met you. Your people brought me food and water and didn't lock my door. You could have had any of about 15 different things done to me to guarantee my silence, and instead you asked what I wanted. I paused. So no, I'm not afraid of you. I'm uncertain about you. Those aren't the same thing. He looked at me like I was something he didn't have a category for. They dealt with Barrington. I didn't ask for details, and no one offered them. What I did know was that on the morning of day 5, Rafferty came into the kitchen while I was making eggs. I'd started cooking because it was something to do, and the chef they had on staff had a day off, and sat down at the counter with the look of a man who had slept for the first time in 4 days. "It's handled," he said. "Good." I pushed a plate toward him. "Eat something." He looked at the plate, then at me. "You made this." "I did. Don't make it weird." He almost smiled. He was getting better at letting them through. "I didn't have you figured as someone who cooks. I had a mom who got sick when I was 19. You learn to cook or you eat cereal." I sat across from him. "There's something I want to ask you." "Go ahead. Why me?" "Specifically." I watched him. "You have an entire apparatus of people, security, staff, whatever the doctor does. Any of them could have been watching that room. Why was it the cater waiter who noticed you breathing?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because none of them were looking," he said finally. "When someone powerful is supposed to be dead, people stop watching them. They start watching each other. Who's grieving correctly? Who's standing too close to the money? Who's going to make a play?" He picked up the fork. "You were the only one looking at me." I sat with that. "That's a lonely thing to be in a room full of your people," I said. He didn't answer right away. He ate a few bites in silence. Then, "Yes, it is." We sat like that for a while, which sounds strange but didn't feel strange. It felt like the most normal thing that had happened to me in 5 days. I went home on day 7. Corso drove me, the same SUV with the same tinted windows, and nobody made any dramatic speeches. Rafferty walked me to the garage himself, which I suspected he didn't typically do. "You don't owe me anything," I said, before he could speak. I did what anyone with medical training should do in that situation. You could have walked away. "I know. You didn't." "I know that too." He handed me an envelope. I started to object, and he said, "It's not a payoff. It's back pay for 7 days of work, at a rate I think is reasonable. You can throw it away if you want." He paused. "Though you mentioned rent." I took the envelope. "I'm not going to pretend I don't know what you do," I said, "or what the world you operate in looks like. I'm not naive. I know you're not. And I'm not going to try to tell you to change it." I meant it. Completely. I'm not interested in being the woman who shows up and decides she knows better than a man twice her age what his life should look like. Something moved through his expression that I couldn't fully name. "Twice your age is a stretch. 15 years then. You did math. I notice things. You know this about me." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "There's an opening at the private wellness clinic I operate. Clinical intake coordinator. No medical license required. Just experience and judgment. The pay is." He named a number that made me blink. "Full benefits. Flexible hours." I looked at him. "You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a job. Because you feel like you owe me." "No." He held my gaze. "Because you're the most competent person I've been around in a long time. And because the room I'm in tends to be safer when you're in it." I thought about the envelope in my hand, and my apartment with the drafty window in the bedroom, and the nursing degree I'd stopped 3 semesters from finishing, and the 3 years of skills I'd accumulated and was currently using to pass canapés at events where nobody ate them. "I'll think about it," I said. "That's all I'm asking." I got in the car. I thought about it for exactly 40 minutes on the drive home, which was about how long it took me to decide that the worst thing I could do with a second chance was mistake it for something smaller than it was. I called the number Corso had given me from the elevator up to my apartment. "Tell him yes," I said when someone answered. "And tell him if he ever tries to give me a company phone that's clearly a tracking device, I'll hand it back." There was a pause. Then, in the background, I heard something I hadn't heard once in 7 days in that apartment full of powerful and careful men. Rafferty Cross laughing. A real one, unguarded, the kind that surprised the person it came from. I hung up and stood at my window, looking out at the city for a long moment. This ordinary view I'd looked at 1,000 times from my ordinary apartment, trying to figure out why it looked slightly different now. I think it was because I did.